going on today, buddy?
What's going on, man? Hanging in there as we all are. Shouts to all the homies across the country, in Florida, Georgia, deal with the hurricane and stuff as well. So as much as you might see me complaining on today's show, which is a very strong possibility, let me be clear, things are doing well for me over here. So I'm thinking about everybody out there and just really excited to talk ball, man. Like at the very minimum, it has not been a boring week. Right? This has not been a boring week, not been a boring last 72 hours. Tons to talk about from discourse to different players across so many really good series. And it's just, I don't know about you, but the regular season, sometimes I'm like, this is really the sport that I cover. Like sometimes it gets a little bit, I know the Padres were good this year, but you get a little bit tired and all that stuff. The postseason is
Yeah,
just so, and I mean, I love all the major sports, the three majors, but I just think it is so far and away the best one. The difference between regular and postseason is just it's amazing. Every hit, man,
it's
every
true.
pitch, it's
It's
just
true.
huge. And it's electric television, and I love it every time.
Yeah, regular season can be tedious in that way. It's also what we love about it too.
Mm.
But you're right. In the postseason, when the games are much more rare and you get those off days, one game can be just about everything. And as you said, yeah, our thoughts and prayers definitely go out to the folks down in the southeast dealing with Hurricane Milton. I'm sure you've seen it by now. Most
Mhm.
people listening to the show has probably seen the images of Tropicana Field, which again is so unimportant compared to life and death for
Mhm.
the folks down there in Florida. But the roof completely torn off of Tropicana Field. That is obviously in relation to the Rockies who play there opening day, March 27th next year, about 168 days away. So the roof that ripped off there was not a very expensive one, not a very high tech one. So can they fix it in time? Probably, but we'll find out a lot more in the days and weeks ahead. So definite thoughts and prayers go out to everybody down there. Thoughts and love going out to the birthday boy today, Troy Tulowitzki, 40
Mm.
years old, believe it or not, the only man in Rockies history to turn an unassisted triple play. And we were talking off air a little bit about the appreciation for Troy Tulowitzki because a lot of people, especially some folks that are new to the Denver region and are new to following the Rockies, maybe you came in from outer state, but Troy Tulowitzki was on a Hall of Fame trajectory very easily through his age 29 season. Was already a four-time All-Star, two-time Gold Glove Award winner, two-time Louisville Silver Slugger Award winner, had 175 homers, 598 RBI, most among MLB shortstops while playing the position, and was one of only 6 shortstops in MLB history at that point with at least 4 seasons of 25 plus homers, joining Hall of Famer Cal Ripken Jr., Hall of Fame numbers Alex Rodriguez, Ernie Banks Hall of Famer, Miguel Tejada, and Nomar Garcia Parra. So Troy Tulowitzki, I think people forget how absolutely dominant he was at the start of his career.
Yeah, I mean, he was so talented. Like that's what I think of when I think of him. Just like the talent was crazy. It didn't take a lot of watching just to see that this guy was like a different breed. It looked like he was going to be the kind of premier shortstop in baseball for a long time. And you know, there's a lot of comparisons you could make. You could bring up, I think someone's brought this up before, but kind of a similar almost vibe to Tim Lincecum's career, where like that one started off amazing. That was like Hall of Fame. You've got the Cy Youngs, all that, and then it just dipped. And then in the case of Tulowitzki, he just kept getting hurt. I guess you could make a Derrick Rose sort of comparison if you'd like. In this sort of case, at least in terms of on field and whatnot, he was a great player, and I think that it was really unfortunate that the trade to the Blue Jays that wasn't like he didn't really do all that much for them. Like, yeah, he had the name value, he had some home runs for them and whatnot, but for the most part, he was bad. Went to the Yankees for a cup of coffee, and then he got hurt, and that was it. But genuinely an electric player who just could never stay healthy, and I imagine that was like must have been maddening, right? Hey, I remember how frustrated it was as a fantasy baseball owner one year. Like I was like so locked in. I think I had him. What was it, 2014? Yeah, it's 2014 season, 170 WRC plus. I mean, my God, like he was on another level, and I really do think that he had the type of talent that if he just stayed healthy, I think he's potentially a Hall of Famer. And at the very minimum, one of the defining areas of at least like late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, as you said, 2014, he was an all-star there,
Mhm.
but spent about half the season on the IL from
Yeah.
2012 to 2014, 3 seasons. That's close to 500 games. He only played in 264. So still ended up with a career 290 batting average, 856 OPS, 118 OPS plus. He'll actually be eligible to be on this December's Hall of Fame ballot. And I think he'll be on it because, again, reaching the Hall of Fame ballot is still certainly
Yeah.
something to be proud of and is a unique thing, but still very much a what could have been. And I was looking at his most similar batters page on Baseball Reference, which spend a day, a week there, maybe take a week
Mhm.
off from work and just scour Baseball Reference because there's so many different areas you can look at and have fun. But his most similar batters in his career is a lot of recent players, and it's a unique blend. So you got Francisco Lindor, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and he's obviously on a Hall of Fame trajectory. Number 2 is Corey Seager, Hall of Fame trajectory. Trey Turner probably has a little bit more work to do, but is still an elite shortstop. Carlos Correa. Then number 5 and 6 are Javi Lopez and Buster Posey, 2 catchers. How is a shortstop similar to a catcher? Well, you hit a lot of home runs. Like that.
Yeah.
That's how that happens. Number 7, Xander Bogaerts. Number 8, Hall of Famer Roy Campanella. A catcher. Number 9, another catcher, Elston Howard, and then Carlos Guillen. So it's very interesting looking at the career that he had and seeing those numbers, the power numbers he had from a position which, even still to this day, it's very rare to have a shortstop be able to have 25 plus home run power.
Especially back then, right? Like I still remember like the top crop of shortstops. There was people might forget, like we're really living in like golden age right now with Lindor, and I know Tatis isn't anymore, but when we had Tatis, we had Corey Seager, Trey Turner, all sorts of players across, Bobby Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson, all these guys, right? That there was that period where shortstop was so shallow, and I'm not like trying to take shots, but it was like Tulo was by far, in my opinion, the best. Jeter was at the late stage of his career, and not to mention, as everybody loves to bring up all the time, not a great defender. But Tulo was up here, but had the injury problem. And then you have like Elvis Andrus, Ian Desmond, guy who played for the Marlins, Hanley Ramirez. Like, just not like those guys. When you think of those guys, you're not like, wow, those are like Lindor is better than every single one of those guys. Corey Seager is probably better than every single one of those guys. So like it really was a shallow position back then. I remember like Elvis Andrus was considered like the best one, right? And that was mostly a speed guy. And Ian Desmond, everyone was like, wow, look, he went 20-20 every year. And then he, fell off for a bunch of different reasons. Also a Rocky, not to bring up any traumatic, I guess, memories for you guys. But yeah, man, like I think that's also a really key point is that Tulo in his class, in his, at that time was easily had like 4 or 5 years where if he could have just stayed healthy, but he was the best shortstop, I think, bar none.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens in 50, 75 years from now, because as a baseball historian, I've seen how we look back for 50, 75 years and say, okay, who did we miss that deserves to be a Hall of Famer when we look at their numbers? And at the time, obviously, it wasn't appreciated, but also because the Baseball Hall of Fame is also a museum and it needs to induct players and sell merchandise and make money. You say, okay, let's go ahead and add this guy for what he was able to do, maybe because of his post-playing career and what they were able to contribute to the sport. And you put somebody in. Sometimes they're alive, sometimes they're not. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with players like Tulowitzki and even Charlie Blackmon, who certainly do not seem to fit the mold of a Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm.
But in 50, 75, maybe even 100 years time, you look back and you say, like, hold on, these players were really special. Sometimes those Hall of very good players end up getting into the Hall of Fame. Harold Baines, look at him. He obviously did not have to wait around that long. So that is an interesting conversation to have when we're all still podcasting in 50 years time, Javi.
Absolutely, man. We'll see how it all shakes out. And Lord knows, Pat, man, Lord knows, baseball Hall of Fame discourse is very calm, very reasonable. Everybody always gets along. The Baseball Writers Association, just a stand-up, all-around group of folks who aren't, going back on their opinions all the time. Just really good stuff. So I'm sure it'll be a nice, serene conversation when that arises.
Also in the Rockies world, Jerry Weinstein, a catching coordinator who's been with the team for a very long time, one of the most respected people in the game, a great catching coach. is moving to the Chicago Cubs. Big loss for the Rockies, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that, but he's been integral in the development of so many young catchers and so many young players in the system. 81 years old. He's going to have a much more expanded role with the Chicago Cubs. Dude has written books. I recommend The Complete Coaching Handbook for coaching catchers. Great follow on Twitter. He'll always put up videos of different things. Definitely is up on all the catching trends. So a big loss behind the scenes for someone like the Colorado Rockies and Jerry Weinstein, who definitely has a lot more value than I think a lot of baseball fans would know. There's so many of those guys behind the scenes that people don't really know much about, but are really huge and important pieces, important cogs in developing a championship type club.
Absolutely, man. Look, we've talked about it before. The Rockies, they've had some weird moments over these last few years, despite having weirdly good vibes at their ballpark, apparently. But yeah, I'm really curious to see, I think, where they go from here, because everyone is talking about the Dodgers and the Padres and even the Giants, frankly. And the Giants have a weird bunch of questions this offseason. I think that all three teams in the NL West, outside the Padres and Dodgers, will definitely be teams that are, you're going to be curious about what happens with them. And it's interesting that we see, like, just it came out this morning that the Twins ownership is looking to sell. I'm curious if there's any sort of thing going on with the Rockies, because I feel like there was for half a second. There was some rumors about that. And then you've got the D-backs, like, how are they going to respond, especially with their owner trashing their own players? That wasn't great. And then you have, the Giants, who have Buster Posey. Speaking of catchers, Buster Posey is going to be the president of baseball ops. So NL West, man, no matter what happens, there's always some new events, new development, I guess, to keep an eye on.
Never boring. Yeah, with Minnesota, we'll wait and see what happens with that. But they still have a new ballpark with, I imagine, 20 plus more years left on that lease. So that team's not going anywhere for 20 years, if you will. Rockies aren't going anywhere either as well. Owner Dick Monfort, his sons now work with the team, and that's very much a business for him. You would like for him to be a little bit more of a better baseball man than a businessman. Nevertheless, he does love his team. He does love, 2.5 million folks guaranteed coming into the ballpark, even if they lose 100 games. So the Rockies certainly are moving, and I don't think there's going to be any sale whatsoever. The financials are interesting, though, especially with the TV deal, and maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit, because the Diamond Sports Group, again, cutting ties with a couple teams, and the Rockies, we don't really know how much money they've lost, but it's reported around like $57 million is what they've been losing by no longer being part of AT&T Sportsnet. How much are they making on the MLB.com side? Again, that remains to be seen, but certainly it could be upwards of $50 million that they've lost in this TV deal. All right, let's get to the NLDS. We'll talk about Dodgers and Padres in a little bit, but the Dodgers put a whooping on the Padres, 8-0. Mookie Betts, his third consecutive game of hitting a ball over the wall, only his second consecutive game of it actually being ruled a home run. Again, we'll talk about Jurickson Profar here in a little bit, but Game 5 on Friday, going to be a big one. Yu Darvish against ? Could it be another bullpen game? I imagine it will be heavily utilizing the bullpen for Dave Roberts, but we'll sort of wait and see what happened. Let's get into the Mets-Phillies, and the Mets knocking out the favorites, the NL East champs in the Philadelphia Phillies, who have now lost 5 of their last 6 playoff games, going back to last year when they couldn't get it done. They couldn't close out the Arizona Diamondbacks. And Francisco Lindor with another big moment in the season, postseason, late in the year, grand slam to lift the Mets late in that ball game. Citi Field was absolutely rocking on Wednesday night.
It was. Got some friends who are Mets fans, some good friends. Congratulations to them. My one friend was texting me like, I don't care. I don't care if it's regular season. Ohtani shouldn't win the MVP. 50-50 is for losers. This guy literally carried the team on his back and hurt his back in the process. Like, the Mets fans rightfully are puffing their chests out. And Francisco Lindor is one of my favorite players in the league. I always, in Just Baseball chat, post the Puerto Rican flag every single time he does something. And I just love that. And then I pretend nothing happens when Edwin Diaz blows a save or whatever, right? But, it's what a team. Miracle Mets is the right name for them. And I think that some people have been talking about how they're not, you know, stop calling them an underdog, some Cinderella story. And I think they are and aren't, right? They're in this gray area where, yes, they have the highest payroll in baseball, but a lot of that is tied up in players that are no longer with the team, right? With Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer being big ones. And bottom line is fundamentally, they were not expected to be that good this year. But it's also true that you don't want to call them like, you know, this ultimate, like I said, like Cinderella story. So it's a combination of this team very much not having expectations, especially if you follow baseball and you've been following the league. But it's also true that you can't pretend that this is, you know, the 29th payroll that just squeaked by with players we've never heard of, right? And the reason why that doesn't happen is because it doesn't happen. You need to spend, and that's a good thing. We should be happy about that. It's not. I think people make this mistake of assuming that it's always this great thing when the low budget teams go farther, when history shows us you don't actually win the World Series if you don't spend. So with the Mets, I think it's a great story. I think Lindor has been a really fascinating player to watch in the sense that I think that he just sometimes gets a little bit underrated because a lot of his big stats get uplifted because of his great defense. And that's not as fun as Aaron Judge, home run, you know, go boom, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. But with Lindor and this Mets team, it's amazing to watch. And I know that they must be absolutely jazzed. And they've just kept hitting clutch hits after clutch hits. The Pete Alonso thing, I almost forgot about that, right? Like that was last week. That was against the Brewers to win them that series, basically, off of like an elite closer in Devin Williams. So I just think that with the Mets, man, like they've got a magic to them. And it also shows you, like, remember when some people were complaining? They were like, oh no, Steve Cohen, bad owner. Look how I thought it was going to be different. It is, man. It is. It absolutely is. I know he was taking pictures with fans at the ballpark before the game. Like they're just living it up. And it's been just incredible considering that Lindor hasn't even been named an all-star while with the Mets. That's wild. And it's not his fault at all. That just shows you, I think, some of the faults of, I think, all-star voting sometimes, the fact that it's in the middle of the season. So really great stuff. Couldn't be happier for them. I would love to face them, my team. That would be cool. You know what I mean? I would love that, but I don't know how that's going to go. So, you know, congrats to the Mets, though.
Yeah, that is interesting, that that dichotomy of, well, they're a surprise team, so they're kind of a Cinderella, but we are talking about the New York Mets. It would be like if next year the St. Louis Cardinals made a run. And it was like, oh, they said it couldn't be done. Well, what do you mean? Like the Cardinals are good every single year. They just had 2 bad years in a row. It's not that, doesn't have that same impact. A little bit different since they're in the middle of the country versus, you know, the mega coast that we typically have. But you're right. It is still the Mets, but it is this version of the Mets, which, you know, I think going into the season, we're projected by a lot of folks at only about 80 wins. So, you know, them kind of sneaking into the postseason and doing this on paper is a little unexpected in that way. And sure, they've got one of the highest payrolls in the game, but their roster isn't that high. It's like you go and look at what the Tigers ran out there in the wild card round, and you say, well, that roster was only about $19 million because Javier Baez wasn't on the roster. Kenta Maeda wasn't on that roster. And you say, oh, wow, these guys that are here are very much underdogs, and it very much has a core of players that is underpaid, that is not making a ton of money. So it is definitely interesting to have that narrative around the Mets, who, you know, and you're probably the perfect guy to ask this about, covering the Padres, but I don't want to say the Mets are doing too much, but they've got a lot going on, right? Between Grimace, between OMG by Jose Iglesias, between now the playoff pumpkin from Pete Alonso. You had Hawk Tua thrown out the first pitch, Frank the Tank on his streams. Like the Mets are latching on to any and everything, and it's too much, I think, in a lot of ways. But go and have fun. Like it's wild, it's fun. I also think it kind of dilutes. I said this on yesterday's pod. It almost dilutes the fan base in a little bit, because it becomes about, you know, going to the games at Citi Field becomes more of a spectacle in and of itself than it is about, hey, I'm here to watch a game. I'm not here for social media clicks or to get a video or something. And I think that can very much be a bad thing for a fan base. That being said, you know what? Go have fun, Mets fans.
I relate to that. And like that sometimes happens with the Knicks, where like the Knicks is just like all these celebrities going to MSG who don't care. But because it's MSG and because it's the Knicks, they're just there getting the front row seats. The Super Bowl, That's the case with the Super Bowl every year. It does not matter what team it is because it's a neutral field most of the time. It's very hard to. It happened once, right, with the Rams, I guess. But like other than that, like in general, the Super Bowl, very sports spectacle. All these people bragging about getting tickets and they don't care about football. So that does happen sometimes. But hey, at least part of this is very enjoyable for Mets fans from afar, right? With the Grimace thing, with the pumpkin, right? Like with the OMG, hey, that's a song that people can listen to. And you can be like, hey, the guy on my team is doing that. It's had similarity with the Padres where Jose Iglesias has basically been their Jurickson Profar in the sense of just a guy that came out of nowhere, has never been this good before, at least offensively, and is having such a good season for them. And just the vibes are really good, man. Like they had the story, Jeff Passan wrote about it, Francisco Lindor, how he's evolved into being more of a leader of this team. The dinners that he and Brandon Nimmo host that always have a purportedly 100% attendance. Like it's a real like tight knit group, I think. And it's always so hard to gauge how chemistry affects baseball. It's different than the other sports. I think the other sports you could usually tell like, oh, those guys don't get along. Look at the Jets, right? Like that's a good example. But in baseball, sometimes you don't know. Some guys can hate each other. They win a World Series, right? So, all I know is that it's been really fun watching them. And if you're the Phillies, not to transition or anything too drastically, but if you're the Phillies, I am one of those people who believes in the law of averages. So I wasn't super optimistic about them going far this year. It really feels like they might have missed their window. And I'm not saying it can't open up again. Things change. Right? Heck, the Dodgers, people probably said that once upon a time. Then 2020 happened, right? People probably said that the Astros, oh, they cheated. That one doesn't count. And then they ended up winning again, right? So it's not impossible, but it's just Harper's going to get older. You've got to, like what can you get? What can you improve, right? You still have Nick Castellanos not hitting well. And to me, I look at it as you were in the World Series that 1 year, unfortunately couldn't get it done against the Astros, who I just mentioned. Then everyone was kind of prematurely, wow, Rangers, Phillies, the year of Philly. And the D-backs are like, hey, we're still here. Then they lose to them, and now you lose in the first round. It's just really atrocious vibes. One of my best friends, he's a Philly fan. He's miserable today. Still with us, thankfully. Like he's still chugging along. I think he'll be depressed for about 2 weeks. But if you're the Phillies, you got to wonder, like, what do we do next, man? Because they've had some really, really devastating playoff losses. And it's not like the Dodgers where they've choked. You know what I mean? The Dodgers have had really bad, like, what are you doing? Why is Mookie Betts 0 for 40? But with the Phillies, it's like, it feels like their momentum just died out. And I'm not exactly sure where they go from here. But then again, I also felt that about last year. And I'm talking too much right now. But last year, the way they lost to the D-backs, that felt like no way you come back from this. And they were, in my opinion, the best overall team in the sport this year, probably, when you look at some of the numbers and whatnot. So don't want to count them out. But man, I would be I don't know where I'd be right now. I guess we'll find out Friday, potentially where I'll be. So
yeah, right. No, they were. I would agree. They were the best team. They were incredibly healthy. They had, I want to say, like 5 guys that played at least 140 or more games. They had 8 guys with at least 120 plus games. That was tied for the most in baseball. 4 starters making at least 27 starts. So they were consistent. And I agree with what you're saying there. And just to give a little more detail, is their window closing? I would agree. And as you touched on, because of age, they're not losing anybody major this off season. Carlos Estevez and Jeff Hoffman. Hoffman got the loss hung on him. Estevez gave up that grand slam to Lindor in game 4 there. Estevez might actually be a perfect guy for the Rockies to end up bringing back as their closer next year, although his price is going to be pretty high. So it isn't until the end of next year that the Phillies lose Real Muto and Schwarber, who, again, a little bit older, but they're not going to be free agents until ahead of the 2026 season. Castellanos and Taijuan Walker after 2026. So they still have that core there of players that and you say, man, this team is really good, but this team is also a little bit older. And that's where that window closing, you say, man, you got to be a little careful. And David Dombrowski is going to have to get creative, I think, this offseason, maybe to change up the personnel, especially if it seems like this personnel isn't the one to get it done. And I say that, and really, I think a lot of this just comes down to these short series where anybody can win. We see it in Detroit right now. They were able to come through with a win, a 3-0 victory over the Guardians in Game 3. Ty Holton ends up getting the save after starting a game this postseason. Guardians out hit the Tigers 6-5, but they just can't pull through. Game 4 on Thursday, Tanner Bybee versus probably another bullpen day. And in the other ALDS Game 3 matchup, the Yankees win 3-2 in Kansas City with Giancarlo Stanton going 3 for 5, 2 RBI, a homer, Michael Wacha and Garrett Cole in Game 4, a rematch of Game 1. I'm curious of your thoughts on the double hook rule, because this is something that was discussed a little bit during the year and was kind of floated out there. The double hook rule being that a team would lose their designated hitter if their starting pitcher doesn't meet a certain amount of requirements. In other words, we don't want any more bullpen days. We don't want openers. We don't want teams to go out there and not have a starting pitcher. Baseball loses its sexiness, even in the postseason, when you run out 6, 7, 8 relievers out there to get 4 outs, whatever it may be, slows the game down. Offenses can't get into that same rhythm. And it takes away a lot of the prestige from starting pitching, because the Dodgers have utilized this strategy, because we're seeing the Tigers do that. Look, you win the game going forward. But if baseball wants to reestablish the value and the prestige of starting pitchers, the double hook rule could be something that we end up seeing in the next couple of years. What's your thought on that, especially seeing it in the postseason where you don't need to have 3 or 4 starting pitchers? You can get by with one. We're seeing that with the Tigers and Tiger Schoolboy right now.
It's a great question, man. And I think I fear that baseball as a whole, and definitely this adds to it, that the Pandora's box has been opened. What I mean by that is that, yes, we all prefer being like Wheeler versus Yamamoto. That is sexy. That is why NFL, Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins. I don't know why that was the two that came to mind, but like, you get that matchup, right? Like you get the boxing, heavyweight, smackdown, like this is the showdown. And having a bunch of relievers isn't as sexy. It's not as interesting. And frankly, like not as fun to watch for me. Like I like to see like, what's the starter going to do? How are they going to go deep into games? But I fear what I was saying about Pandora's box is that it works. You know what I mean? The way we all complain that it's 2 home run, strikeout, or walk, it works. You know what I mean? So I'm just wondering, are we too deep into the strategy and teams figuring out with the math, with the regular season, that this is how you make it to the play, at least make it to the playoffs? And, I think that the postseason can be a little bit weird with the home run happy ball a little bit sometimes, because then, Aaron Judge, for example, like he hasn't been doing very well. That sometimes happens, but I just fear like we're too deep into it. And I think this has been a problem for a long time, which is that baseball has not adjusted to the ever-changing landscape of our world, for lack of a better term, right? Whether it be, hey, football is getting more popular, technology, all this stuff. Maybe should we shorten the regular season a little bit, get a little bit of that edge in August for the playoffs? I don't know. Too late now. You know what I'm saying? I think that they've been making too little too late. And I think that I wouldn't mind the hook rule. I think that it's fine to do something to penalize teams. Jeff Passan wrote about this for ESPN, or I forgot if he wrote about it, if he just spoke on a podcast about it. That's what I was listening to. The SI podcast with Jimmy Traina was saying, like, if he was the commissioner, the one thing he would do is he would limit pitcher slots. That way it would force and begin to force pitchers that, and he was bringing up, maybe it helps with the epidemic of Tommy John surgeries, where instead of teams prioritizing guys that throw super hard, which again, about the Pandora's thing, it's like, well, it works. We have numbers. Batting average goes down with higher velocity. That instead, you're not going to get those guys throwing 100 because they have to stay into the game. You're not going to be innings pitched will become more of a important stat. You know what I'm saying? You'll be there and saying, yeah, it's nice to have the guy throwing 100, but if he's going to get hurt, and if he can't go very, you know what I mean? Like, so in order for him to do that, to help his team, that they don't have to use, an extra starting pitcher, whatever it would be, that he would have to say throw 96, 97. But again, I just fear hitters have caught up, all those sort of things. Like, is it too late for that? But I don't object to baseball at least trying, even if it is a little frustrating, the hook rule, but at least it's something. Again, it's some sort of penalty to be like, maybe you can't do this the whole way, and it makes it more of a fun viewing experience and something for fans to talk about.
This rule would be something that totally unthinkable of a couple years ago. But now, with baseball having instituted certain rule changes with pitcher limits, right? You can only have 13 as the max. Maybe less would be more, and would certainly would decrease the amount of Tommy John surgeries, as you pointed out. But with limiting shifting, I think that's a big one.
Mhm.
Teams did it because, as you said, it worked, but it made baseball a worse viewing option. It
Mhm.
made it a little bit less enjoyable. So they got rid of that. And now there's some more balls being put into play. Strikeouts have gone down a little bit.
Mhm.
Batting averages have gone up a little bit. We're seeing more stolen bases because of those rules. And teams will adapt, teams will adjust. And overall, baseball just looks better for it. I don't think there's anything lost because teams aren't shifting. Nobody is saying, I have yet to hear anyone say, man, you know what would have been great if we could have had 3 infielders on the right side of the infield.
Yeah.
I do miss those days. So it's for that reason I think we really could get something like that double hook rule in, because really, as you pointed out, it's been happening for a while, really since the book Moneyball came out, which wasn't a philosophy. That was just a title that Michael Lewis gave to what the Oakland Athletics were doing, trying to
Mhm.
find value in a way in which is being undervalued. That was ultimately, the start of this analytics movement. And baseball
Mhm.
had these rules that hadn't been touched for decades. And teams said, well, you know what? Not to say we don't have integrity or a certain amount of dignity, but if baseball is going to allow us to do X, Y, and Z, we're going to take advantage of it. That's where tanking came out of. And now we're starting to see with the lottery draft, like, okay, you can only be bad 2 years in a row. And if you're a large market team, only 1 year, and you're going to be left out with the 10th or 11th pick in the draft. So you can't just go and stockpile all of these draft picks and prospects and prospect pool money. So I think something like this very much is going to happen. And like with the shift, it'll be something that we don't really observe, like
Mhm.
the netting, the added netting. Everyone was up
Yeah.
in an uproar about it, and then it came, and no one talks about it
No
because you
one.
don't really see it. Just like you
Mhm.
don't notice that the bases are a little bit bigger. I don't think we would really notice that double hook rule, or maybe even, as you said, with Jeff Passan's article about limiting pitchers. I think that thing could make the sport a lot better, reduce Tommy John surgery. I think we might be on the same page there. I think it would be better for the game if this rule were to come about.
Absolutely. And I think that you touch on, just to go on a little soapbox for a second, baseball fans complain about everything, right? Let's just be honest. And I think that, like you just mentioned the netting. Remember when people complained about the home run rules changing? I remember that. And guess what? The Derby is like better than it's ever been. People complain about the DH. Guess what? No one does anymore. You know why? It's not fun watching a pitcher watch 3 strikes go down the middle. It's actually not all that interesting or strategic, right? So I think that overall, anything baseball could do, anything that's proactive and showing that they're not just going to sit on their laurels, I think is overall a plus. And I think that in general, I will say that it has impacted the pitch clock, the viewing experience. I will say, like, if you go to a game, there is something a little bit about, like, oh wow, 2 hours, we're done. Dang, I spent, you know what I mean? Like, I do empathize with that a little bit, but all in all, I think with where they're at a situation where it's like, guys, you have to make some changes. Like every other league has, NBA has done it, NFL has done it a bunch of times. You have to do something. You can't just sit on there, especially as the sport that has had some issues with viewership, especially among young people, acquiring new fans and whatnot. So I think it's a plus, and I'd be all for it.
Our buddy John Salvino referencing our previous conversation. Phillies may have missed their best opportunity. Next year, Atlanta
Mm-hmm.
gets back Strider, Acuna. They still have that core, and that core
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm not going to say substantially younger than the Phillies, but certainly, a couple years younger, I would say, on average. So you're right, that opportunity to win the East, but maybe that benefits them, right? Because they're getting in
Mm-hmm.
via the wild card. We're seeing the benefit these wild card teams get. It's funny you mentioned the pitch clock and changing the viewing experience. I've noticed this a couple times. One, just the pitches keep coming in.
Yeah.
I keep score at the game. I'm writing. I'm working on different things, and the game moves so much quicker where you don't have time to pause and, oh crap, I better take advantage of this pitching change and run to the bathroom and then run back, because it moves so much quicker. And every time that the Dodgers came to town, partially because he bats the leadoff, partially because the Dodgers score a lot of runs, it felt like Shohei Ohtani was up. Where this guy is up again? Like it was virtually every 25 minutes, it felt like Shohei Ohtani had a plate appearance. So that was an interesting new wrinkle that we've had to deal with at Coors Field, partially because of the pitch clock and partially because you do now have the best player in the game in your division. This is probably a good time to say, Javier Reyes, just baseball, talking about Padres-Dodgers, game 3, kind of a blowout, 8-0 there. This has been still a really good series to watch, again, despite the result on Wednesday night, because Dodgers and Padres are the best rivalry in baseball. And, the jawing back and forth, the fan bases both being very intense certainly helps. And I think everyone would agree that it very much is Dodgers Padres, which now sitting in the middle of it, okay, it makes sense. But 5+ years ago, Padres versus anybody would not have been on anybody's bingo board to say, hey, Padres and this other team is going to be a great rivalry. That would have been so far down the depth chart, because it's really been these, historical franchises. It's Yankees, Red Sox, Cubs, Cardinals. I mean, Dodgers, Giants too. They've got a history back in New York. And I think a lot of Dodgers fans would say that the Giants are their top rivals. But lately, it's just been Padres, Dodgers, and seeing both fan bases lose their mind for the positive because they're winning and lose their mind when they're losing. It's entertaining. It's definitely entertaining.
It's absolutely entertaining, man. And look, it's funny because, you'll get a lot of the whole it's not a rivalry stuff, especially from the Dodgers fan base. And to an extent, that is true. And what I mean by that is, yes, historically, of course. But I want y'all to look me in the eyes and tell me that Giants-Dodgers games have the same ferocity as when Padres and Dodgers play. It's not there. A nascent, more new rivalry still counts. You know what I'm saying? And you see this in a lot of the other sports too. Where like teams hate each other for a little bit. And just because something doesn't continue forever doesn't mean anything, right? This isn't back in the 90s and the 80s where like, frankly, I feel like there was just less things for people to do. So that's what it felt like. But there's so much competition for things that I think we should like cherish every time, even if it's for a little bit, even if the Padres were to fall off and the Dodgers were to fall off after this. Appreciate that. It's very real. You can tell it with the fan base. They're arguing all the time, myself included. I've been a part of this, absolutely tweeting some slander over the past few days. And it's electric to watch, right? Like it's just great. And it's really one of the best ones we've had. Phillies Braves, we've had actually like a little bit of, fan base clashing, especially over the last year with the mascot and the sideline reporter, the broadcast of the Attaboy Harp and all that stuff. Shouts to the person who just previously commented, reminded me of that. And yeah, I do think the Braves I just think that they're going to kill it next year. I really do. But that's another thing. Padres, Dodgers, like these fan bases hate each other. And then not to mention this time, and I imagine we're going to get into it, it approached a national level. And it got more discourse. And I think part of that was because of just the lunacy of game 3, right? Absolutely insane. Fans that were throwing stuff onto the field, Profar's catch, throwing stuff at Tatis, hitting Tatis, Jack Flaherty, which is something that conveniently Ken Rosenthal left out and did not harp on too much in his article. And that article about Manny Machado, the sinister sling, I think started putting this on a national level and more people talking about it. And the discourse just became, it was a snowball effect, right? And then it just kept going. And obviously I, as the Padres fan, but I think objectively speaking, I think that article was a little gross. I think the Peacock comment was just totally out of left field. And I just don't understand. Nobody had issues with, even the Dodgers fans. They were like, no, we have issues with Manny and Profar. No one was talking about Tatis. They were just like, can we get this guy out? You know what I mean? I don't think anyone was talking about him. So that was very weird. Then you think about the history Ken Rosenthal has when he, was talking about Wander Franco and how paying young players is a risk. And I was like, what are you implying? And then he mentioned Tatis in that article. And I'm like, Wander Franco, Fernando Tatis Jr. cheating versus, what Wander Franco did. Okay, so that's odd. So there's been a lot of bitterness towards Ken Rosenthal. And I think towards some mainstream outlets in general that are trying to say that the Padres are villains. And I think that I just don't see it. I really don't. This team has so many great stories. And we were just talking about the low budget and the underdog thing. I wouldn't call the Padres an underdog, but historically they are, right? This is a team that has never done this. And I think that's the difference between them spending versus, say, the Yankees or the Dodgers, is that They've never done this, and it's great for baseball that a new team has decided to join the party table, I think. And that's what's happened right now. So, it got really, really messy. And then in game 4, unfortunately, the Padres got absolutely mollywopped. Dylan Cease was horrible. He's been horrible the entire postseason. Bullpen couldn't keep it contained. And you saw, we were just talking about this before, Dodgers bullpen game. I think baseball fans sometimes make the mistake thinking that a bullpen game is like throwing in a backup quarterback. You know what I mean? In the middle of a football game where it's like, you can still win. And these guys throw hard and they're fresh and they just know they have to go 2 innings maybe. So it's still very possible to win. And you might see that happen for the Padres or the Dodgers in game 5, man. But my God, you can't tell me these teams that when they play, it is an electric. It is easily the most, with the Braves and Phillies, just a little bit behind, I think. The number one rivalry in the sport, Yankees-Red Sox, has not been a thing for a very long time. And this one is filling the hole. And I think it's been great for baseball as a whole.
It's interesting you use that term villain, because I think it has been thrown around a lot. And to me, it's surprising from the aspect that, like, I don't see the Padres as villains. I see them as being kind of, as you put it, this new kid on the block, this almost new powerhouse. And anytime there's somebody new on the scene, they do things differently, and they got to where they got in a different manner. It's like when Juan Soto came up, did the Soto shuffle, and you go, okay, maybe it's a little bit disrespectful, but it's a little style, it's a little flair that I think the game needs, and I think that's fine. And all of those things that the Padres have been doing has that flair. I for one didn't think the Peacock quote was a comment from Ken Rosenthal was that negative. I almost take that as a compliment. I like that, but I do want to talk about Ken Rosenthal. But let me set the scene. So when it happened in real time, I thought, okay, man, there's a lot of incidents happening with the Padres, but take them one by one. All right, Tatis gets hit by a pitch. He takes his time walking down to first base. I have no problem with that. Like, again, there are some fans, some old school fans that, hey, run to first base. No, you don't have to. Like, that would be an interesting stat. Can StatCast track guys getting hit by a pitch and how long it takes them to get down to first base? Was Tatis, longer than normal? I can't really say, but I had zero problem with it. It's something that happens. Profar robs the home run and then sells it. We've seen guys do that before. Julio Rodriguez did that, I think, a couple years ago, and everyone's like, oh, man, it's like the second coming of Ken Griffey Jr.
Cody Bellinger did that against the Padres in the playoffs in 2020.
I had zero problem with that whatsoever. I do understand why, if you're Mookie Betts and you're the Dodgers, you're annoyed by it.
Of course.
You can be annoyed by something and it not be a problem. It's just, hey, from my perspective, I did not like this thing, but do I have a real problem with it? No, I don't. And that was, for those 2 incidents, I got no issues with either of them.
And let me just clarify. The reason the Peacock comment I didn't like is because of the context. Because Ken Rosenthal writes, Machado is far from the Padres' only irritant. Tatis, you know what I'm saying? If that was just in a vacuum, that's fine. But you're including that comment in a way that also disparages Profar as being the kid who pulls the alarm and says, who me, that type of thing. So that's why I think it was received poorly. There's nothing like in a vacuum that was wrong with it. I think it's kind of maybe a compliment, you know what I mean? But when you're framing it as like, look at Tatis, he's out there and so flamboyant. It's like, what's going on here? And the Profar thing, it's just, I think that there's a really big difference between being annoyed versus turning it into this whole thing. Right? Turning it into this whole, wow, they're so it's like, guys, what Profar did, like what Manny did, which we'll get to in a second, that is just a regular day at the office in basically any other sport. And baseball fans need to realize that. In football, you get a sack, those guys are like unleashed, they're going Super Saiyan. And NBA, Steph Curry literally does the sleep thing towards the fans. It doesn't turn to this whole thing with fans throwing stuff and then the opposing coach being like, yeah, there was something, nefarious behind it, to paraphrase what Dave Roberts said. Like, it's really, I think it's almost like embarrassing sometimes when these things become a story, right? When it becomes a story about, we're using Zapruder film analysis to analyze Manny Machado, and Dave Roberts is like, I think he tried to hit me, or to paraphrase, like it was in my direction. It's like, actually, the replay literally shows it bounced like 5 times. And then it was closer to Teoscar Hernandez, and you didn't even notice it. So, like, let's not turn this into an all-encompassing thing, right? when the Oscars happened with Will Smith. Let's not turn a slap between two rich people into some commentary on the entirety of Hollywood and society and what it means. It's like, actually, I think those are two people just getting really mad at each other. I think that it's kind of funny to just look at that. And in this case, I think it's two teams that hate each other. There was someone who actually tweeted, they were like, was what Manny did disrespectful? Yeah. Guess what? They both hate each other, and they both have been doing disrespectful things constantly. Let's not clutch our pearls and act like he was trying to kill the man, right? And that's why I think the Rosenthal article stuck wrong, because it felt like he was riding on that old reputation Manny Machado had for an easy, polarizing article, and you saw what transpired afterwards. So, it's just hey, these two teams hate each other, man. You know what I'm saying? Like the hatred is real. And I love it. I mean, at least it's at the very minimum, you cannot say it's boring. Even if you're Dodgers fans, Padres fans, whatever, you cannot watch this and say, it's not a rivalry, man. It's not. Yes, it is. It is. And
fan bases hate each other too.
I
don't, you would know better than me.
Mm-hmm.
Did Mike Schilt's comments defending Machado get any heat? Because I sort of thought that was a little sly statement that he made about, did Machado throw it over? Look, he's got a strong arm. You saw that on that triple play. I thought there was some sass on that. And again, straight faced. So again, I don't know if folks took it that wrong way. You're right with the Peacock thing in context, because I originally saw that the next day where Tatis, has I think on Instagram where it's a dancing peacock. So that was my first instance of like, oh, cool, he's a peacock. Like, yeah, he is. That's awesome. But you're right. Had I read that in the article, I think I would have taken that differently.
It's like, why is that a negative, Ken? You know what I mean? That's why I think it came off wrong. But
the Profar comment about pulling the alarm, again, coming from someone who used to be a teacher in a high school, we know about school shootings, we know about certain behaviors. Mm-hmm. That was one, I think, that was maybe a little bit, off the cuff, that maybe you don't want to think about again a little bit more critically. Because again, I Machado and Flaherty exchanging words again in that moment, I was fine with that. I wasn't fine with Machado having a little bit of vinegar maybe on the ball that he's tossed over, but I have that in a gray area. I don't have that in a that was clearly whatever. The ball that he was
tossed. Yeah, they tossed
at Roberts, which was interesting because when I saw the Zapruder film from the overhead camera, they show Machado throwing it with a certain velocity on it, which wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
But then when the ball was going into the dugout, that ball was going really slow.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of like, oh, is this the same one, or do you throw it fast and then it dies out because there's a big separation between the foul line and the dugout? So again, it didn't cross a line to me. Tatis Jr. inciting the Dodgers fans, gyrating a little bit, doing a ravishing Rick Rude. Again, it's close to the line, but it's still in a somewhat of a gray area of I would prefer if my guys didn't do that on my team. At the same time, okay, it didn't cross a line in my opinion, close to it, but I was fine with it. Fans throwing things definitely too far. Bad. That just can't happen in any capacity.
Yeah, I think that it's just this happens every other day at every sport, right? Like I just think that we have to follow that and be like, guess what? It's not a big deal. These two teams hate each other. They're going to be disrespectful. Was Manny doing a little thing? Yeah, but we don't have to then cry to the media about it and turn it into this whole thing. I got to distract from the fact that my team might lose again. And I've been the head manager for 6 Dodgers collapses. So I'm going to now put the spotlight on Manny Machado. So that was this whole thing. And I think that with Tatis, I do believe that happened after. I can't remember when he did the jeering at the fans. I know the one video of him going like this or whatever, they were trying to turn into some class. I'm like, you just hit the guy and he hit a home run. Who cares? You know what I mean? I don't mind it on my team. My thing is, man, you better win. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to be that guy who's talking smack. You don't want to be like a Patrick Beverly type, right? That's the issue. But for me, again, it's just so amazing how this has happened and how many weird stories we've got. The Rosenthal article is a bunch of things, right? It's not just the peacock, it's the context of it. It's not just that he complained about Manny. It's what you were trying to turn it into. It's like, come on, man. And then, and it made the news. Kevin Acey, the San Union Tribune, kind of confirmed that the Padres basically had a 1-game boycott. And while I saw like some page Baseball Doesn't Exist who does great work saying like, oh, the team that's calling the Dodgers soft won't do an interview. I'm like, yeah, but there's context. Context is needed here because he took a shot at one of their players and it was bereft of the context of what Jack Flaherty did. And I don't even think Jack Flaherty did it intentionally. But Jack Flaherty was getting really mouthy. Machado was getting mouthy too because they were like, hey, you just happened to hit the best player on our team who you can't get out. I don't think they did intentionally, but it's fair if you're them to feel that way. And I don't think that you should be yelling backwards at them, et cetera, et cetera. And then our players got got stuff thrown at them. And they're the ones that are not getting an article written about them and all that stuff. Then you combine the Wander thing I mentioned earlier. And that's why we're at where we are right now. And then Rosenthal, of course, that does a Tatis lived up to the moment article, right? Like the day after. And it was like, oh man, this must have been bad. So yeah, man. Can't wait to see what happens in the last game. Maybe we're just going to get a full-fledged brawl at the end of it. I don't know. That would be hilarious. But we'll see. But either way, man, teams hate each other, and they should because there's been a lot of slights both ways. In my opinion, more so in the Dodgers way. But overall, it's there, man, and it's back, and it's fervent. And I can't wait for Friday night and to hide behind something as I watch it the entire time because this isn't fun, dude. It's not fun for me. You get to just chill. You get to just chill, Pat. You're like, oh, yeah.
We get to watch the NL West burn. The NL West burns to the ground for Rockies fans. It's funny in talking with some of my colleagues, Ken Rosenthal, I think, asked a question of Jurickson Profar at one point in San Diego, and Profar just kind of shoot him away and didn't really answer. So I think now I can put on my resume that I was on good terms with Jurickson Profar, and he always answered the questions that I asked of him when he was with the Rockies in 2023. So I do feel elevated very much in a way. Yeah, you Darvish going in Game 5, are you worried about that? He has already had a Game 7 in Dodger Stadium when he was with LA, where he wasn't able to live up to that moment. That was a few years ago. I don't know how much bearing that has on this. But I hope cooler heads prevail and we don't have any real crazy incidents as passionate as it might seem, like the Malice at the Palace. And you go, oh man, that was a wild scene. Like that's not good at all. We can have wild, but it be positive. And,
exactly.
And that's what we need. We need wild positivity, not wild negativity.
Exactly. With Darvish on the surface, not worried at all. And the reason why is very simple. And I do believe, and this is just me speaking. This is a feeling thing, not necessarily very empirical. I think Yu Darvish does have a little bit of, not animosity, but a little bit of a grudge against the Dodgers because whether it be the fan base, whether it be the team, there's a lot of, it's because of you we lost in 2017. You know what I mean? As if y'all the same team that has Clayton Kershaw, right? I don't see you giving him that same crap. Y'all the same team that had X and X and X and X and X star players, right? And I think Darvish was like so embarrassed from that. Could read an Athletic article from Andy McCullough from a few years back, a profile sort of piece on him that really affected him. And I don't think it's a coincidence that because of some of the fan base stuff, some of the way that seems like he got most of the ire, right? The Machado thing makes sense because he wasn't very good for them in the postseason. Then he signed for the rivals. So of course you're going to be like, screw you, right? That makes sense. But with Darvish, he then went to the Cubs, right? Darvish has the 6th lowest ERA since integration against the Los Angeles Dodgers among pitchers with at least 15 starts. I have to believe for all those reasons, and again, it's just a me thing, that I think he really does not like them. And I don't think he likes how much of the blame he got when this is a team that has lost to the Nationals without Bryce Harper. This is a team that got swept by the Diamondbacks, a team that lost to the Padres a few years ago, a team that loses to everybody. And it feels like Darvish got singled out a bit, and he got a lot of heat for it. It was leading airwaves, so media had a problem with this. I remember segments on PTI. Oh, can you give Darvish this money after what you saw in the postseason? So part of me is wondering, is that why he has a little bit of a grudge to be like, yeah, all right. You know what I mean? I let you guys down, but I'm going to beat you this time. And maybe there's a little bit of a thing there. And his ERA and success against them proves up. Shohei Ohtani just has not been able to hit this guy. But then again, man, I talked to you about it before the show. I'm a big law of averages guy. At some point, Darvish isn't going to pitch a gem game against the Dodgers. And at some point, the Dodgers are not going to blow it. I don't see them losing a first-round series for the 3rd year in a row. As much as I like making fun of them, as much as they are in a lot of ways the Cowboys of baseball, I just don't see it happening again, especially in their home turf. But I have been very much proven wrong before, as evidenced by the team I just mentioned, the Dallas Cowboys getting absolutely shellacked by the Packers in their home field in the first round last year. So we'll have to see. But that's just my early opinion on it.
I love your take because I also subscribe to the school of playing both sides of the fence. Hey, I'm going to predict the Dodgers win, but I want the Padres to win. You're going to feel good regardless of the outcome. And I do that a lot myself. So yeah,
Always
it'll be
in Philadelphia, babe. Look, that's why I play both sides. So no matter what, I always come out on top. Yeah, exactly.
It's true. And Ken Ohtani in now his second elimination game, first at home. Can he beat the guy that was his hero growing up, Yu Darvish? I mean, they went to the same high school, for crying out loud. That was the guy that as a teenager he looked up to and idolized, and I think in many ways he still does. So, will he be able to have a little bit better of fate against Darvish? Can Darvish continue that dominance of the Dodgers? That's why we're going to be watching Game 5, and then we'll see what happens in the with the American League Championship Series. That starts on Monday. NLCS will start on Sunday. So we could have 5 straight days of baseball in New York. Should the Yankees get this thing done here? So we'll see. Javi, go ahead. Thank you for joining me. This was a ton of fun as always. Plug away. Let folks know where they can check out all your content.
Yeah, you can check me out on Twitter, firstly, at Javiipeno, JAVIIPENO. You can also check out my Locked On Padres podcast, cover the Padres every day, shocker. You can go check that out. I also have a podcast for Just Baseball called Baseball versus the World, which is like very fun, evergreen topics. We did a fictional character draft last week. New episode, hopefully, we'll be having out next week. We were off this week, but yeah, go check that stuff out. And, of course, check out Just Baseball. It's a pretty good website.
For your fictional player draft, did anybody select Pedro Serrano by any chance?
Yes, Pedro Serrano was picked by my opponent. Unfortunately, I was unable to acquire the rights to him, but I did get Pablo Sanchez and Roy Hobbs, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Got a character from Hey Arnold. Yeah, feeling pretty good.
Yeah, is there a minor league system? Because maybe you go Kenny Nunez, right? And you sign him a little bit early.
Exactly. I mean, he made AAA, right? So no, we just did a 9 lineup. We didn't get super deep into it. Maybe the next inauguration, though. But the next time we might have to run it back and make it even deeper and have bullpen arms and all that sort of thing. Maybe we get really crazy with it. But for now, he did not make the cut because unfortunately it literally said he made it to AAA. So I was like, can't do that. You know what I mean? I might get killed for this one. So.
But maybe he was blocked by a great starting rotation for all we know. He could have been very valuable. We'll see. Well, let me in on the next time you do something like that. I think I've got a spreadsheet somewhere with like 100 names of players from baseball movies. Bingo Longo All-Stars. I mean, you could draft James Earl Jones multiple times throughout this. So, Javier, I appreciate you joining me. At Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB is where I can be found on the socials. At Rockies_Insider. Javi, thank you for the momentum. But, as I like to say in this podcasting world, momentum on a podcast, it's only as good as your next show. So I will talk to you then.